Ah, the dreaded deadline. Every project has a deadline. Deadlines get things done, but are they one scary word? Maybe this episode can help. Welcome to The Right Focus, a podcast for writers at all levels, headed up by M.A. Lee with the assistance of Edie Runes and Remy Black from Writers Inc. Books. The focus is on productivity, process, craft, and tools. Resources, links, and a summary of this and other episodes can be found on therightfocus.blogspot.com. Write to us at winkbooks@aol.com. Our podcast episodes last as long as it takes to fix a quick dinner, drive a short commute, or take a brisk walk. Remember, we're bookcasting with Think Like a Pro, New Advent for Writers by M.A. Lee, copyright 2017, with the revision. This episode is Chapter 1, Part 1, entitled One Scary Word, Deadlines, the dreaded deadline. I start with deadlines because they are the single most important key to success. Every project has a deadline. Without a deadline looming, harvest, publication, trial date, gallery open, season start. Without this coming date, nothing would get done. Deadlines get things done. Harvest deadline is the first frost. Trial date, the starting date is set by the judge. Gallery opening, set by the gallery owner. Season start, set by the powers that be of football, soccer, basketball, baseball, etc. Publication date, well babe, you set that. Hate them, despise them, loathe them, want to shoot them. Deadlines are necessary. We get no reprieve from a deadline. When we don't meet it, it still stands. We've just passed it and no, we are behind. First step to a deadline. Setting a deadline is the first procedure or series of steps that anyone starting a project must determine. Very simply, a deadline means when is this sucker due? For indie writers, their novels and stories and blogs could be due whenever, but whenever is not. Things and blogs could be due whenever, but whenever is not thinking like a pro. For any person anticipating the start of a new job, new career, new life, the deadline will not be a whenever drift into dream. Deadlines mean reality will come. Deadlines mean here's the date. Let they all know when their project deadline is. For the career professional, the deadline is the day the case starts or the client arrives. The pro artist anticipates the gallery preparation. The canvases and prints must be ready before the gallery does any setup. Pro athletes train for the first day of training camp, which comes long before the start of the official preseason games, which lead to the real season, and all of those lead to the bowl games and major tournaments that culminate in the athlete's season. Gallery showing and season's over, case done, projects complete, everyone looks at the next project. Want to go pro, publication is the deadline. Publication is not a nebulous dream. We're turning dreams into reality. The time for drifting and dreaming is over. We have determination, and determination means we set deadlines. 3 deadline tricks. Here are the 3 must-have deadline tricks, so-called because they magically turn dreams into reality. These deadline tricks work not only for writers, but for anyone tackling major projects. While these are separated for writing projects, other projects can and should be broken into major areas. Training the body is not merely rest. Full fitness, the different muscle groups are considered. Overworking the body can be as dangerous as not working the body at all. Anything put into the body is extremely important to its performance. Diet, fluid intake, avoidance of EMFs, all are just as important as any group of exercises. Artists need to know the skills for their art, naturally, but creating a gallery showing is in many respects telling a story. What is the overall impression? How did the first canvases create the first perspective? How will that perspective change as attendees move through the gallery? Which techniques will work best where? For career professionals, newbies have all their official training. Then comes soft skills, people skills, and daily work coping skills, and the unseen, almost covert processes that run a business. What tools are needed? How best to use those tools? When do those tools not work? when approaching a project, especially the way a lawyer does. What is the end result? What are the steps to achieve that end result? Our doctor's diagnoses. When can she trust what she knows? When should she doubt what she knows? When should she research more? Writers write. But how many days do I set aside to reach that deadline? You ask. I won't be like other people who would answer, you'll learn. Or even cruelly, you'll know when you've done it a few times. We're starting. How can we know before we've done it? Keep reading. I'll explain how to build your deadline. For now, here are the 3 must-have deadline tricks. Ready? Trick 1. Determine your daily work routine. Your work routine means how much you can reasonably accomplish when all works well. That sentence is important. Let's parse the important elements. Key words, reasonably, and when all works well. This is not when everything's going great. Determine a basic meetable goal. For writers, this is an achievable daily word count. For athletes, the number of hours that can be devoted to training on each day. Even artists consider the amount of work on a canvas that can be achieved over several days. Lawyers consider the time needed for preparation of the upcoming case. Witness statements, interviews, official depositions, law research, scene mapping, and on and on and on. Note well, in the above examples, with the lawyer and the athlete and the others, all of the goals are time-based. Your reasonable writing goal is not a sprint, not a squeezed-in segment. If you had an uninterrupted hour, how many words can you reasonably churn out? How many hours can you reasonably work each day? How many days per week do you lose to other more pressing concerns? Do the math. What is the word count for your project? For writers, novels and novellas and short stories and scripts and blogs, all these have specific word counts. Genres have specific word counts. Are you writing an epic fantasy of 120,000? Are you writing a romantic comedy of 45,000 words? When you know what you need to write, you have your first working number. Divide the total expected word count by the writing goal. This gives you an estimate of the number of days needed to complete the project. Yes, I hate math too, but we have to do it. Trick 2. Determine the steps needed to achieve your goal. Just like any project, writing has a lot of hidden steps that outsiders never see. Writing is much more than pouring the words onto the page. Novels, especially, are very involved and very messy projects. Here are the top 10 factors to consider when starting a writing project. These factors build a novel. Ignore them at great cost. Factor 1. Prep time to set up the necessary background information of the whole project. Spend the time creating the most important ones. This little manual also has a second take on characters based on Aristotle in Chapter 4, One Ancient Greek. At the beginning, a well-considered character takes between 1 and 2 hours generally, while a secondary character, foil or blocking figure, will take less than a half hour. Antagonists should be just as important as protagonists. Walk-ons should be 5 minutes. Factor 2. Building the book. Prep time. Before you ever start the official manuscript, spend some time knowing if you have a book or not. Something similar to the 12 Key Pillars of Novel Construction by C.S. Lacan or my own Plot 7 to determine if this idea you have will actually turn into a book. The Plot 7 is in this chapter, Develop Your Plot. And of course, Chapter 4, One Ancient Greek, presents Aristotle's take on plot, quite different from the 12 pillars and the plot 7. The 12 pillars and the plot 7 take me 3 to 5 days, sometimes more. Once I did it in 1 day, but nothing else was going on that day. Wouldn't you know it, I had to come back a week later and add more. The creative side of my brain needed percolation time. Factor 3. Research prep, including world building. World building is more than setting, just as setting is more than time and place. Setting is also culture. Think of the many cultures in a high school. Jock, bad geek, drama nerd, hoodies, scared newbies, drifters, and go-getters, and more. World building creates a map of the immediate place as well as the larger world. Contemporary writers may seem to have it easy. However, the rapid pace of technology will quickly cause anachronisms. What are the ethnic groups? the governmental entities, the religions, the rebellions themselves a fanatical religion. The social structure is usually a pyramid with a mass of people at the bottom. How is that mass of people controlled? The education structure, the narrow-minded and the hidebound, the level of technology. If you were going to match to an actual historical era, what tech will be available? It's been lost. The ancient Greeks forgot how to write. The water wheel had to be reinvented. The Chinese had black powder long before Europe did, but the Europeans developed cannons, while the Chinese developed firecrackers and rockets. How do different areas in your world use the same tech in different ways? The flow of rivers, the run of the mountain ranges, the forest and the lack of forest, the swamps, literal and figurative, and more, much more. Factor 4, writing the basics. This is your math equation from Trick 1. To that answer, add the following. How many pages will you devote to each chapter that moves the protagonist from plot point 1 to 7 or through the pillars? Generally, your chapters are main plot points which might take 3 to 5 chapters to cover. Consider that a manuscript usually has between 200 to 250 words per page. Some chapters run from 7 to 21 pages in length, depending on the type of work it is. William Faulkner and James Patterson have had chapters only a page in length. Faulkner, in As I Lay Dying, actually had one short sentence for a chapter. My mother is a fish. Programs like Scrivener have an arbitrary scene length and number of scenes per chapter length. Life, though, is rhythmic, with ebbs and flows of less and more. This is a guesstimate. Build in extra if you don't like writing tons of words as you draw closer to the deadline. Some people say they work best at the last minute. Having dealt with the procrastination, that your best work is never rushed. When you consider the minor characters such as seeming allies and foils, what gaps remain in your character list? Who do you still need to add in? The scene sequence will help you determine your chapters. Chapters may have 3 or more scenes. Factor 5. Planning at the midpoint, because life happens, even in stories and blogs. Characters change. The plot falls apart. Your mind throws you a twist that improves everything you're doing. That fortunate twist, unfortunately, requires rewriting and adding and gutting. Midpoint planning may take 2 to 5 days. By the way, will you revise as you go or revise at the end? Both. Fair warning, revising adds chaos back into a manuscript that you thought had become orderly. Factor 7. Editing. Developmental editing. Content editing. Line editing. Factor 8. Cover development, the graphics, and the blurb. Factor 9. Correcting the editing. Keep your fingers crossed. However, you may wind up at Factor 3 again. And Factor 10, getting everything ready for publication, the yippee step. Formatting the manuscript can be a beast, a conquerable beast, but you need to factor a couple of days at minimum. Trick number 3, count the days for the whole project. Get out a calendar, a physical calendar, not a digital one. Don't have one? Print one. Draw one. I like digital, yet blocking out a calendar is best done on paper. Trust me on this one. That small screen hides things and hides the big picture. A deadline is big picture. It's like depending on a small screen map app versus seeing a plat of the roads you actually drive. Map apps are convenient, but it's easy to get lost unless you are a complete robot. Not that I'm prejudiced against robots. That calendar in your hands creates a mental process that begins a brain change. When we are moving from drifting dream to determined reality, brain changes are necessary. Start blocking off days to create your deadlines. This many days for factors 1 to 3. So many days for factors 4 and 5, and so on. Start running the word. 2 handfuls of days to fall behind for unforeseen circumstances, like the flu, like a car breaking down, like a friend coming to visit, like 4 weddings and a funeral. Remember, life happens. How many days for factor 6? Expect problems when you are revising. Factor for editing. Number 7. How many times? How many people? Oh my God, how many interruptions? And definitely be a pro here. If you ship out editing, what will you work on while you are waiting for the manuscript to return home? Finding some trustworthy first readers, beta readers, and factor the time needed for them to help you at this point. Don't give them the chaos, please. Give them what you think is a finished manuscript and ask them to be brutal. You may want to ask yourself, do you need a developmental editor? Do you need a content editor? Yes, you need a line editor, spell check, and grammar reviewers don't catch everything. Factor for 8. The blurb is extremely important. It's more important than your first chapter. How many days did you set aside for the first chapter? Schedule that number of days for your blurb. Devote a solid day to the tagline. You're working and reworking and revising your blurb and tagline. Take a break from words to consider what you want the cover elements to be. Image is more important than words. Factor for 9. When you spend sufficient time on factors 1 to 4, correcting the edited manuscript should fly. If you are a pantser, editing shows up problems that will affect the entire manuscript. If you're a planner who's also a pantser like me, you'll have a few problems, but not the major chaos that I've heard some people talk about. I will admit to gloating that I didn't have that back-end chaos. Nope, my chaos is at the beginning and in the middle. Factor for 10. Mark everything on your paper calendar. Did you see birthdays? Any major events like graduations or weddings, anniversaries, holidays, vacations, etc.? Yes, I know, but family and friends. Don't schedule through them. Schedule around them. By some fortunate circumstance, if you find you get in unscheduled words on Christmas Day, consider those words your Christmas gift to yourself. Now, pull out that handy digital calendar and input the major deadline dates. Finishing prep, finishing draft, manuscript finished, revision done, editing completed, corrections over, cover received, publish. It would be lovely if all you had to do was start with the first sentence. Some people can do this, many cannot. A lot of pastors who never finish need to reverse the first sentence. A lot of plotters who never finish overload their engine with too much planning and lose all interest before they reach the middle. Don't start with a blank idea of where you're going, and don't start with so much prep that the spark of creativity is overshadowed. Wow, haven't we run long? Creativity is overshadowed. Wow, haven't we run long? In our next episode, we will continue with deadlines, chapter 1, starting with the 3 sets of 7 for success. Thank you for listening. If our podcast had value for you, please drop a line to winkbooks@aol.com. Until